Welcome to the Story Enneagram podcast. I'm Jim Gum, and I'm an Enneagram teacher and coach living in Kansas City. I have a man crush on one of the late-night talk show hosts. I think he's smart, funny, and does a phenomenal job of interviewing his guests. I even got to shake his hand once and tell him that I was his biggest fan. One of my favorite things on his show is when he turns the tables. He serves as the guest on his own show, and one of his old friends interviews him. I always learn a lot about him and about his story. In this trailer, I am the one being interviewed about the Enneagram. I'm the guest, not the host. I first met Justin McRoberts in 1997 at a staff training in Florida. We've remained friends since then. He's a musician, author, and an all-around great guy. I always enjoy being with him. Justin is not a fan of the Enneagram, at least not in the form that he'd been exposed to. We were together at a conference where I taught a few years ago, and now he's a lot more open to it. He asked me some great questions, and I hope you'll enjoy his podcast and getting to know me, your host. From the At Sea podcast, episode 97, Justin McRoberts.
Oh, the Enneagram. It is, like many tools, so often misused or misapplied. And it feels to me, at this point, that a lot of folks are stuck between some form of infatuation with the tool itself or with their type, and some form of annoyed disdain with the whole thing. I'm not a fan of the Enneagram. Not the way people are fans of the Boston Red Sox or Manchester United. I do like what I see happen in the lives of people who apply the tool wisely and lovingly. Jim Gum is a certified teacher of the narrative Enneagram. There are many approaches to the study and application of the tool, and having worked with Jim in a few different settings, I really appreciate his take. Specifically, Jim introduced me to the idea that knowing myself by way of the Enneagram is ultimately not about knowing my type. It's about transcending my type and knowing myself as whole. We cover a lot of ground in this conversation. I think you'll dig it. Check it out. You've been doing Enneagram work for way longer than you've been in the church. That church.
Yeah.
Did it jump out of you dove into Enneagram stuff because you needed it, or because you were around people and you were trying to figure people out? Like, how does that start for you? Where you're like, there's this tool. Is it like a personal interest? Was it like, I need to figure out leadership? How do you get there?
Yeah. So the Enneagram came to me, and I feel like it came to me as a gift at a time in my life when I was not looking for the Enneagram, but it was offered to me by Brennan Manning.
Okay.
I was on a silent retreat. It was December of 1991. I was 2 years, or about a little bit more than a year, into my first ministry job as a Young Life area director, and had plunged into a state of depression twice, both in the fall. And on the silent retreat, you didn't speak, but you did have an hour to kind of process stuff with Brennan. And there was one afternoon, it was December 10th, 1991. I have it in my notes. And I said, look, I have got something about me that is compulsive, and I'm aware now that it is not helping me. And I can't seem to get a handle on it. And I was 30 years old, right on schedule. That's when you need to go to counseling, age 30. Make your appointment now if you're not there yet.
Oh, that's really good.
I hadn't gone to counseling yet, but I was in a personal crisis. I had never been depressed in my life. I think that fall, my wife asked me a question, because I would come home from work and I said, hey, I just need to make a couple calls. And it was before texting and cell phones. You actually had to sit by the phone and call people. And she asked me this one day. She said, "Hey, when are you not working?" And
Wow.
and that's a hard question to be asked. What's harder is to not really have an answer for that. And that was true for I was always, the joke was I was always thinking or planning or doing something, and I was realizing I had hit my personal limitation on that. I told that to Brennan. He'd been listening to me for a few days, and he said, "Well, you need to learn about the Enneagram." And I wrote it down. I didn't know how to spell it, ENNEA.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he told me about the book Personality Types by Don Richard Riso, which came out in 1987. So the more popular Enneagram books, Helen Palmer's and Don Riso's, came out about 87, 88. And even though the Enneagram had been in America for about 17 years, there was a long latent period. And it had thrived in Catholic communities, and it had thrived with Catholic spiritual directors. And so I got that in a sense from Brennan, who was a former Catholic priest and was using it in direction. Immediately went out and bought the book. Immediately realized I was a type 3, which is an achiever type who has a fixation about achievement, goals, work, and the most workaholic related type.
Right.
And the consequence of that for type 3 is they don't pay attention to their emotional life, because emotions will slow down the workflow. They'll get in the way.
Yeah.
And that wasn't how I rolled. And then I think ultimately I was absolutely afraid and terrified of my emotional life and really didn't want to go there.
Yeah.
So, so that started the journey. It's been,
so you had to have someone else point it out to you. Like it wasn't a matter of like, which is sort of an Enneagram thing. Yeah. It's like someone else has to say, I need you to, or you need it came from the outside. It wasn't like self-discovery for the sake of it. It was relationship.
Yeah, it was. And that year I'd also taken the Myers-Briggs for the first time, and that was helpful, insightful. And really, I had the Myers-Briggs that February, and then I learned about the Enneagram. And what I found for me was the Enneagram not only described what I was like, but it gave me a pathway to get unstuck. Okay. And that was what I thought was the most powerful aspect about the Enneagram. And, or the way I like to say, you're in a box and you need to find out what your box is. That's learning your type, but you spend the rest of your life trying to dismantle and discard and get outside that box. So, so that's been the journey. And then maybe for 20 or 25 years, I was probably the person who told more people about the Enneagram in that context. I was usually like, have you heard of the Enneagram? No. And then I would, talk to people about it. But I didn't really teach it formally, and I hadn't been formally trained. I wanted to get trained and go through schooling in it in the 90s, but I had neither time nor money. I was an area director with 4 young boys, and, I didn't know how I was going to come up with any money to go somewhere and get certified.
Right.
And I didn't. So that started late.
What does it mean? So for someone who, well, for most folks, the idea of like an Enneagram certification, what the hell is that? Like what, like, this is like, it's right. I mean, the engagement with this thing is like, well, there's this thing, it's a personality test, quote unquote, or it's a personal growth tool, or it's it's a way to know myself, or it's a way to understand but you can get a certification as an Enneagram person. What does that even mean? Why? Well,
the school I went to, was the Narrative School, which was out in the San Francisco Bay Area, that was founded by Helen Palmer and David Daniels. And what it meant for me was taking a number of classes, understanding Enneagram theory, understanding the spiritual ramifications behind it, understanding how you would try to determine another person's type, a number of how to teach the Enneagram, all these things. And there were like two tracks. There was a teacher track, and then there was like a counselor coaching track. And it involved both coursework, 5 or 6 classes, and then it involved a mentorship. And I was mentored through the narrative tradition by Beatrice Chestnut, who wrote The Complete Enneagram. And so she would watch videotapes of me teaching. She would watch videotapes of me doing typing interviews and then give me feedback. And then I kind of eventually had like an oral exam where I had to do it before the accreditor. And so I got a certificate that I'm certified in the narrative tradition to teach the Enneagram. I would say there are different levels of programs, and, it's not like a college degree. What I think with any education thing, it's the process that is more important than the product. And I think rounding out my understanding of the Enneagram, especially that, most people, they'll learn their type, or they'll think they learn their type. They'll learn their spouse's type and maybe their kids and their boss. And then there's a few other types that they don't really understand that well. And so I think formalizing training really helps to one thing we looked at in our class was type bias. Everybody has types that they prefer than others and that they don't like, and just taking a look at that and what types do you tend to have the most trouble with, and what are the biases there. It was that was a helpful concept to realize, I'm biased against certain types. And,
so insofar as you can get a certification and there's training, is it possible? I mean, just as a broad conversation, is it possible to get this thing wrong? Like one of the things I like about your approach to, or your posture, the way I guess it's a posture thing. It's not just an approach. Is the answer to the best of my understanding, watching you talk about the Enneagram and its use, is you can get this wrong. Like, you can do this wrong. Like, I would say a third to a half of the people that I encounter are probably not quite right about their Enneagram type. And I'll say this for a number of reasons. Number one, the main way that people learn about the Enneagram now is vehicles like this, a podcast. Mm-hmm. Or secondly, the most common thing I'll say to somebody, like, have you heard about the Enneagram? And they go, well, I've taken the test. And it's in the definitive, the test. And what they're referring to is probably a free online test. And it might get you in the ballpark about your type. And you might be fortunate enough that it's right the first time. But I think about 5 years ago, I began to understand in the narrative tradition, which focuses on the instinctual subtypes. So instead of 9 types, what you really have is 27 types with 3 subtypes per type. And it's more nuanced than what a lot of people use is, what's your wing? 9 with an 8 wing or 9 with a 1 wing. It explains a lot. And I think what happens is, because of this subtype influence, there are a lot of lookalike types. Type 6 would be a good example to talk about. So type 6 is a very common type. Their core passion, or their fixation, is what could possibly go wrong, or hazards, or their passion is fear, which I believe is a very latent and kind of hidden passion that a 6 thinks that everybody should be cautious about life, and they don't see what they're doing as being pessimistic or fearful. They just see it. They're realists. That's how they see it. Right.
But I think the subtypes with the 6 are so fascinating because, in a sense, what a subtype is how does the passion play out behaviorally?
It's like the functional part. There's like the static, I am a whatever. And then the question of like, okay, what does that look like in action? Yeah. That's a subtype.
That's a subtype. So 6 would be a fantastic example. So 6, the 3 instinctual variants or subtypes are the self-preservation, the need to survive. It's how we all enter this world. Like I need food, clothing, shelter, safety, skin-to-skin contact, all that stuff. And that becomes dominant for people. The other one, second one, is the one-to-one instinct, that need to connect or make that mirroring eye contact that a mother and a child does, or two lovers do. That I know you and you know me. That's the sexual instinct. And then the social instinct is, how's my relationship in the group? How's my relationship in the family? How's my relationship on the team at work with my peers? That's the social variant. And so if you take the 6s, for example, which are so varied, they almost look like 3 different types. So if you're a self-preservation 6, the fear is going inside you, and you are coming up with a strategy to feel safe. And the strategy is called warmth. It's by creating an army of friendships, and you are warm and friendly to people. I have a coworker who's a self-pres 6, and if he's in the building and I'm in the building, he always comes by, hey, just checking in, how you doing, what's going on, and he's friendly. And so that one looks like a 2 because they have all these friends and they're kind of watching out for him, but they're not a 2 in terms of always looking to serve one another, to be liked. They're a 6 because they want to feel safe. Right. And their strategy for being safe is a multitude of friendships. So our worship director, self-pres 6, his name's Mike Crawford. He put an album out like 10 years ago, and it's called Mike Crawford and His Secret Siblings. And he literally has a worship team of like 50 musicians that he stays in super contact with, and he's beloved. And it's a strategy for security. The social 6 aligns them. It's called duty. They align themselves with like a right philosophy or right way of being. And if I follow these rules, I'm going to be safe. And so they'll look like a 1, like a perfectionist or a person that needs to be right. But they're not needing to be right. They're needing to find a code of ethics to feel safe. And then the third type of 6, the sexual 6, is the one that acts scary when scared. Right. And so they look like an 8. And so they'll often get mistyped as 8s. And 8s they're the strongest type on the Enneagram. They're about power and control. This 6 isn't about power and control. It's about intimidation. Oh, you're scaring me? I'm gonna get real big and scare you back. So it's kind of like fight, flight, or freeze. Yeah. In terms of the strategies, and they present very differently.
So you really go, you don't just go into like, hey, there are multiple ways to understand your own type. There are multiple manifestations of your own type, and there's a journey to your own type, because that's part of the trick, right? It's like the difference between, theoretically, the Enneagram and as a tool and a lot of other tools. It's not like, hey, you're typed, you're done. Shocking, you're an asshole, here's how, and then it's over. It's more like, yes, you are, you're an asshole, and here's how you get better.
We're all, I think what happens typically is people learn their type and it explains so much of their behavior, and then they double down on it. And for me as a 3, my growth path is actually away from workaholism. It's away from achievement. It's away from not being able to relax. And so that's true for every type. And so a lot of times what happens is people find out their type. Oh, I'm a 2. I'm a helper. Well, let me help you. I'll help this. I'll help that. And they are not getting into the unconscious motivations to help, which ultimately probably relates to, I just want you to like me, and that's the truth that we have to face. Every type has to face some truth about themselves that they would rather probably not look at. So that's kind of where I think, there's a lot more interest in the Enneagram since the Road Back to You and the podcasts have come out. I'm grateful for that, but in a sense, it's like gold leaf. It is a very thin layer.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. It's like for you, there is a usefulness to the introductory knowledge, but it's not just. And tell me if I'm getting this wrong. It's not. That's neat. That's fine. Have an introductory knowledge, but this is not the kind of thing you want to stay introductory with. That if you're going to get into this, if you're going to do this, then you really need to take the next several steps and commit to the longer term with this as a tool. Because if you don't, this is what I'm picking up from you. If you don't, you'll damage yourself and other people. This isn't just like hey, I know some stuff about myself. That's neat. Let's move on. You can actually hurt yourself. You can move into really bad patterns emotionally, socially, sexually, if you don't really understand yourself more fully. That the Enneagram is dangerous in a way as well. Is that somewhat accurate?
Yeah, and I would say one of my teachers, Aranio Pais, says it this way. He says, really the goal of the Enneagram is that it's about the 3 centers of our being, our thinking, feeling, and acting. And all of us have those kind of out of balance somehow. Too much thinking, not enough thinking, too much feeling, not enough feeling, too much doing, not enough doing. You can imagine how that could play out. And the first thing that we need to work on is to become a human being. And a human being has ready access to whatever aspect of their self they need, whether it's thinking, feeling, or acting. That's part of that is just regaining our lost humanity, returning from the fall. We all have just a distortion of ego that is played out in our types. And then he goes, once you've done that work, once you become a human being, then you can really become a spiritual person. You can really focus on the higher aspects of each type. And the higher aspects of each type are the very opposite of what the personality types show as. So an 8, that is, they're known as aggressive or bossy or loud. The holy idea of the 8s is holy truth, and their virtue is innocence, almost like a childlike innocence and tenderness and accepting. And that is not typically how we talk about 8s. We talk about them as bossy, brash, and they don't need to double down on that. That's the last thing they need, in a sense. They need to get in touch with their own inner vulnerability and tenderness and their own getting comfortable without being in control. Getting in control is just a strategy, and being loud and brash is a strategy to gain control. But it isn't going to serve them long term. So it's almost like it's opposite day. Here's your personality, here's how it presents, and we're gonna try to disrupt that as much as possible so that you can experience fully what it's like to be human.
Do you have for someone who is, let's say, they're neck deep in the thing, they feel like they have a grasp on their type? Are there ways for someone, how does one recognize I think I could be off on the wrong road? Or how does someone come to, because you're saying, which I agree with, you can say hey, you can type yourself wrong. You can be wrong about yourself, which let's you and I just be honest for a minute. That's just some stuff no one wants to hear, especially now. Self-knowledge is the prized possession in American culture. If you're between the ages of 17 and 45, knowing yourself is like, only I get to know that, and everyone else gets to step all the way off. And I will tell you who I am, and I'll use this tool to justify my self-knowledge. What you're saying is like, you're not that smart, actually. Like, and the tool is smarter than you. How does someone come to that kind of like wise moment where they're like, yeah, I don't think I know myself? Like, what is an indication if you've typed yourself wrong? How do you know that?
Wow. I like what Richard Rohr said in his Enneagram book, that if you don't see the Enneagram as in some way just a little bit humiliating, you probably haven't quite found your type yet. And I always love the quote by Jung, who said, it's a horrible shock to become acquainted with yourself. In other words, if for my type as a 3, and I spent the early part of my life priding myself on the things that I got done. Okay. I could accomplish big projects, and I could do it better than the average person. And so you could get recognition for that, or you get jobs or job offers and or praise. And so that is, in one sense, that feeds that thing that you've created, which is the need to achieve. The downside is it creates this monster that, what have you done for me lately, that you are beginning to serve compulsively. And so I think what causes somebody to grow spiritually is when they have the experience of limitation. Like maybe they have a loss and they don't have emotional capacity to process grief. They don't go there. That was my own case when my father died 20 years ago. I was sad for about 8 weeks, and then I thought, okay, this is not working. I need to kind of get on. I'm just staring out the window, kind of thinking about Dad being gone. He died suddenly. Yeah. And so I made up my mind, okay, we need to move on with life. And then I'm in the counselor's chair 9 months later, and she's going, well, you shortchanged the feeling part of this. You shortchanged grief. Ooh. And so the reason we show up with the counselor so often is I have anxiety or depression. Anxiety is something's wrong. I don't know what it is. Yeah. Depression is I'm trying to push down whatever it is that's bothering me, but it's bringing everything down. Yes. And so those are usually the clues. And I kind of joked about, when you're 30, you need to, you probably will start going to therapy but you're not wrong. I mean, that's funny, but it's also true. Yeah. And what happens is our personality, the personality type isn't in and of itself bad. It was an adaptive strategy that got us through our childhood, whatever wounds we might have had there. It got us through college and picking a major. It helped us pick a mate and kind of got us into our career. So all that happened, and our personality helped pull us along and do that. But eventually we've got to deal with the stuff that's undeveloped in us, or that's compulsive, or that we haven't looked at. And that's typically what happens in the second half of life. Jung would say it that way. The lessons of the morning will not take us through to what we need in the afternoon of our life. And the two halves of life, it's really a completely different game, once you get to 30. And then once you go to counseling, sure enough, who shows up there is mom's sitting on your left and dad's sitting on your right. Yeah. And you got to process what that whole thing was about. Yeah. And you made up a story about it. And and families will do that. They'll, sometimes your mom and dad will give you the story. Yes. About which they do. That's the job, right? That's part of the job as a parent, is you actually provide a narrative so that your kids know who they are. And then eventually when you get to be an adult, you go, I don't know about that narrative. That wasn't really true. I'll tell you a story that's kind of fascinating. Yeah, go. that I've been dealing with. So I'm a 3, and I had a type bias against 6s. And 6s seemed hesitant and not bold and confident like I would come across, and would also slow down plans, and I like to move forward on plans. But the crazy thing about type 3, it's connected on the line to type 6. And what I know about the Enneagram now is you got to go there first. You got to go against the arrow to 6 and kind of deal with some of that stuff. And so I went on a retreat at a Catholic retreat center. I think it was the same place I learned about the Enneagram. And I just kind of sat with, what is that 6 for me? And began to realize a large amount of fear that I had never fully acknowledged. I took an assessment 20 years ago by Don Wooster. You probably took it. Remember when Don Wooster was doing that assessment?
Yep, the big fat questionnaire.
Yeah.
Yep, I remember this.
I took this assessment, and he said, wow, your anxiety is really low, like 3%. In fact, your anxiety level is the lowest I've ever seen on one of these tests. And I thought, yeah, that's right, man. I am calm, cool, and collected. And boy, was that really not true. And I began to really lean into this aspect of myself that was very afraid. And then part of doing the adaptive strategy where you try to get stuff done, it's actually a fear of like, I got to perform well. And if I don't, they'll see through me.
Right.
It was fear motivated. And then it got even deeper. So I grew up with a story in my life that Jimmy was accident prone. Jimmy was accident prone. And Jimmy was accident prone because I had stitches 7 times, I think, before I was in the 4th grade. Okay. Various accidents around the house or out with friends. And was always going to the ER to get stitched up. And so I grew up with a narrative. My dad would say, oh, Jimmy's accident prone. And then probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I'm almost 60 now, I started going, wow, that was an interesting story. And I thought, I have 4 boys. We didn't come close to going to the emergency room 7 times. I'm not like uncoordinated. And then I began to realize the story about what was really true in my life that really made me anxious is that I was raised by a mentally ill mother who was not able to really function that well when I was young, and especially as I got older. I became her guardian 20 years ago, but have had to be responsible for helping her function in life for about 32 years, since she was about 55. Mm-hmm. And so then I suddenly thought, hold it, I wasn't accident prone. My mom, like, where was she when I got run over by the bike, when my brother's friend ran me over? Where was she when, I stepped on the needle in the floor? And where was she? She wasn't attentive. And I grew up, in a sense, getting injured because I wasn't watched. And I think ultimately I realized, man, my childhood was a scary place. And I had to make it on my own. Yeah. And, and then that insight led me to understand I am not a classic 3. I'm what's called a counter type 3, and my instinctual subtype is self-preservation. Well, I know where the self-preservation dominance comes from. I kind of had to watch out for myself and raise myself. And this subtype, the self-preservation 3, is called security. And so how did that manifest in my life? I never really realized it, but I would just say things like, well, if you do a good job, you will always be employed. Or I would say to my wife, kind of a vow, I have never been unemployed a single day of our married life. that type of thing is kind of an achievement thing, but it really is fear-based and security-based.
Yep.
And like, hey, I've never had a lapse in our benefits ever, and I realized, oh my gosh. And then part of being a counter type is it's counter vanity and when I was first married back in the 80s, somebody got me an Izod sweater, and that was in the preppy era. And
with the alligator on it?
It had an alligator on it.
That's so good. I had one too.
I cut it off. And
you didn't?
Because I like the sweater. And one day I was sitting at lunch with somebody, and they go, did you cut that off? And I was just so like outed and embarrassed, but I didn't want to be showy, which is what the counter type 3 looks like. Which is why I think the subtypes are so important. The idea of 9 different counter types that are really hard to assess with a free test. So
one of the things you get to, and I'd love to hear you break down the journey in general.
Yeah,
but there's a transcendence that you look for that as an Enneagram coach. It's part of what, like, again, in order to avoid the pitfalls and the dangers of the Enneagram as it's improperly used, and to actually maximize the actual gift of the tool. The gift of the tool is not so that you would know, hey, you're a 4, you need to be special. Hey, let's figure out ways for you to be special that are useful. Done. Yeah. That's not really the gift. That's part of the journey, but the transcendence, that to learn who I am, so that in Enneagram terms, to learn my type, is part of learning who I am. I'll actually rephrase it like this: to learn my type on the Enneagram is to understand an element of, like, a doorway into who I am in wholeness. But in order to understand who I am in wholeness, that has to do with transcending my type, which I don't think I'd heard an Enneagram coach talk about before. So can you do 2 things for me? Can you talk about the journey where you're like, there's the discovery part, and then there's this sort of like you're in love with your type thing, and then you're disillusioned, and then like talk about the Enneagram journey and the importance of actually transcending your type. Yeah.
I don't think this is talked about very much, especially now that the Enneagram has become popular. But I see like 3 aspects of how people go along the journey in personality, and then 3 aspects of when they begin to transcend the type. So the first part I would say is just oblivious that you even have a type. And so some people are resistant to being typed. I get that. And I don't tell anybody their type, or especially unsolicited, offer. And that would be the biggest sign of a novice Enneagram person who goes around the room and types everybody. It's annoying, and they're probably wrong. They're probably wrong. Like one of my coworkers, who a beautiful guy named Bill, and we spent 2 years just talking about the Enneagram, and he was just a fantastic employee and very helpful. And I guess he'd heard about the Enneagram about 5 years before I knew him. And there was a band playing at the church, and he helped load up the gear. And one of the guys said, "Oh, you know about the Enneagram? You're probably a 2 because you're helping me do this." And so it's like the question that only 2s can help. All other 8 types can't help at all. That's not true. Anybody can help. But he didn't know about typing. If you've never heard about the Enneagram, you're kind of oblivious that you even have a pattern or a pattern way of being. So that is the first thing that I see, is that people kind of don't even realize they have habits of type. And I'll say this situation happens and you always react a certain way, or this type of situation gets you the most upset. I think that's a pretty critical way to look at it. So that's the first thing that I see is kind of oblivious. Then you understand your type, and you begin to understand kind of the patterns of it. And then also it kind of often moves into caricaturization. So, 8s are bossy, 7s are like Tigger, and 4s are like sad and moody and always playing sad music, and 1s are anal or whatever. And it becomes kind of this caricaturization thing. And typically those things are maybe describing one subtype. And I find that I really dislike a lot of memes because they tend to be hard on one type.
Yeah, it's like it's not even just characterization. It's like it's minimization. It's like you are this, and because you're this, I can name you and put you in a place.
Yeah.
And sort of own you from a distance, like, oh, you're just this way because this. Like now, it's not a tool that's helping someone grow in themselves. It's a tool that puts them in a position to be overpowered by someone's basic jerkness.
Yeah, it's kind of any of the typologies can do that. The Enneagram, I think, is especially prone to that. That the early days, some of the earliest practitioners said the teacher would maybe let you know your type, but you weren't supposed to talk about it with anybody. It was like a secret knowledge. And, there's this aspect when somebody asks you your middle name, like Justin, like, what's your middle name, Justin? And, and the question,
Ryan. It's just, we'll just do the whole thing. It's Ryan. My middle name is Ryan.
Yeah, but there's a certain sense that when you tell somebody your middle name, you give them some power. And it actually goes back to Middle Age times when people would do numerology. And you figured out a number, a name had every name had a number associated with it. And you kind of do some black magic on somebody if you knew their number. So when somebody would say, I've got your number, it meant they knew your middle name. That was kind of supposed to be secret. And a sociology teacher that I used to teach with told me that. And
I'm suddenly really uncomfortable about a lot of conversations I've had over the course of my life. Like, wait, what?
You find it to be true that even when you're still today, we're not in the Middle Ages, but when somebody asks your middle name, it's like, do I trust you with it? Like, are you going to take care of it? Are you going to make fun of it? Mm-hmm. And my middle name is William, but I'd always tell people it was Walter, just because that was funnier to say. But
I don't know why that's better, but yes, go for it.
So anyway, that's the first part of, I'd say the journey of the Enneagram: typing too many people, over caricaturizing too many people, minimizing people with the tool. And then the growth happens, I believe, when you get to limitation of type. And that's actually what I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, is how I learned about it. Hey, I've got this compulsion. It is not helping me. This drive to work all the time is not making me healthy. And it's the limitation of that type. A 2 will find it when they overhelp and burn themselves out. An 8 will find that if they take too much control and they alienate those who are with them. A 5 will do that when they go too internal and too overthinking and they get paralyzed or they get too isolated. All those things, all of our types in personality will lead us into really ultimately limitation. And so the next aspect that I think is really important is the idea of we have to do shadow work. And shadow work. Yeah, shadow work.
Meaning what?
So it's another Jungian idea, the idea that there are aspects of me which I'm not aware of, my blind spots. And I either am not aware of them or I'm slightly aware of them, but I really don't want to look at them. And part of, I think, that good work in terms of bringing everything in is to embrace both the darkness and lightness of your type. And I read a book this fall called Making Friends with Your Shadow. It's out of print, but it's a good book. But it basically said sometimes the harder we try to really live a life of goodness, the shadow grows, alongside that with the same amount of strength. And I think so often, especially in faith environments, we will see a fall of a Christian leader and just go like, where did that come from? And the truth was it probably came from his unattended shadow that had begun to have a lot of strength in his life or her life.
Yeah.
And we see it all the time, especially see it in Christian circles.
Yes.
Like, wow, where did that come from? And it's like, that came from your shadow that you hadn't addressed. And like what you are actually capable of or what is kind of going on inside. And I think part of that growth is kind of going, wow, the Enneagram lets me know that all 9 types are fantastic. They have these fantastic things and they all have shadow aspects and nobody gets off. There's no type that doesn't have a shadow. And so doing that shadowy work is really a deep growth thing.
Yes.
And a lot of that shadow stuff is directly related to the passion, so for a 4 that you identify with the last time I spoke to you, envy can be a really shadowy thing. And then envy can sometimes, morph into schadenfreude, where you wish bad things for people,
resentment.
Not that you've ever had that thought.
Just like 7 to 10 times a day. Short list of people. So, I've narrowed down the people that I want bad things to happen for, which is, I feel like, is progress. I used to want it for a lot of folks. Now it's like, I want really bad things for only a few people.
Yeah. And that's growth.
I've grown. I feel better about me and the way I hate.
Yeah. And then I would say that's like a stage is embracing your shadow. Then the final one is like your type in personality is really something that does not define you anymore. And so much so that sometimes people can't tell what type you are. Like the 8 is innocent and the 1 is serene. They're not angry or anal. They're peaceful. They can laugh at stuff. And the 7 is sober. All these virtues are almost the very opposite of the passion.
Yeah.
And the 2s aren't proud about all they've done. They just are humble. Like, I can help you if you need help, but I don't need to help you so I feel good about myself. It's a completely transcendent.
Oops, hold on. That's not supposed to be on. Go ahead.
I hate when that happens. Yeah.
That's all right.
That aspect of really the end game of the Enneagram is that you say goodbye to the personality, and you have a strength and a superpower.
Yes.
But you only use it when it's needed to be used, not all the time. And for me, I can look in a situation and I can get a project done probably more efficiently and quicker than most people, but I don't need to be liked, or I don't need to feel important or significant. But if it's needed, I can go, hey, I'll take that on. I'm fine with it.
Yeah. And
then I don't need it to feel significant that I'm a worthwhile person. That has nothing to do with that.
That's good.
Yeah.
There's something to be said here too for the affinity, right? You started by saying one of the ways we identify like an actual journey in the Enneagram or with the Enneagram, and that Richard Rohr in his book about the Enneagram, is like, if it's not humiliating to a degree, you're probably not doing the work.
Yeah.
But one of the fruits of the work is like, I like myself, like, is coming to an actual, like, not like a false, like, I like that I'm cocky, but like, no, I don't like that I'm cocky. And I like myself well enough to not want to be cocky anymore.
Yeah.
Or I like that as someone who's generally identified as a 4.
Yeah.
I like that I can get into the middle of a room and I can get control of that room with gifts, talents, the whole thing. I love that about myself.
Sure.
And I had to move through a part of my own journey in which, like, I actually don't like about myself that I just want the attention because it makes me feel good.
Yeah.
And to a place where it's like, hey, I can do some really, really good work
Right.
in other people with the attention they give me.
Yes.
And it's like, and so I used to like myself. This is what I say it now. It's like, I used to really like myself. And in order to like myself, I had to ignore all kinds of shit that I did not like about myself in order to like myself. And now I've done the work and I love who I am and I don't have to ignore anything. Like I'm okay with all of it. There's a self-love part of it that's part of the journey. There's also like an other love part of it that like I love that you get to, and I'd love to wrap it up with this, is like there's something to be said for the difference between the Enneagram as a tool and so many other tools is your type is a type only insofar as it has a relationship to other types. It's like there is no one if there aren't 2s and 3s and 4s and 5s. There's no 4 outside if there's no relationship. That as a tool, it sort of bears witness to like you are who you are because you have a relationship with people who are not you.
Right.
And if I don't come to a love of other persons, I've not done the work that the Enneagram is asking me to do.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's one aspect about the Enneagram is learning who you are, like who God made you to be. What are these gifts, these insights, the holy ideas, the virtue that you can really, in a sense, I think mirror what God intended for you to be. I think it gives you the pathway to that. Secondly, it gives you this huge amount of compassion, like the burdens that all the other 8 types that are not you are carrying. Like, what is it like to always have to feel to be in control? What is it like to feel like you can never make a mistake? Oh my gosh, would that be awful? That you beat yourself up? It would be awful.
Yeah, and I don't despise the person who feels that way.
No.
Man, I want better for you.
I want to relieve that burden from you. I mean, one of my favorite things that one of my teachers says, and I often say this to ones, and especially I'm at a church that's, I say the average congregant is about 40, has 3 kids or so, and they've got kids at home, they're struggling, and there's a very dutiful one mother who is trying her best to be a good mom, and she's a Christian, and and all that stuff, and her child is an 8, or she thinks they always usually come up and go, how early can you tell what somebody's type is? Because they think they might have an 8. And I said, well, don't type them yet, but you can come up with your theories. But basically, this mom is under this heavy, heavy load of like, I should be doing better as a mom. I should be better. I should be able to control his behavior. When he behaves poorly, it reflects on me. And one of my teachers said it this way about ones. He said, all the other types need to work on getting better, but the one needs to work on getting worse.
That's really good.
And I'll tell you what, you say that to somebody, and especially when they're stressed out, maybe about being a parent, they will tear up.
Yeah, man.
Because they know they've been holding that in so much. And I tell them, I go, hey, listen, you won the integrity award among all your friends and your family. And I tell you what, you can just pretend like you have a trophy and put it up on the shelf, and no one will ever think that you don't have the most integrity of anybody.
Yep.
And you can just go have fun and live your life and don't do dishes and go play.
Trust yourself.
Yes.
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 Yeah, and again, this is why I want to end here, is because it's the thing that I have really valued about your posture towards people in their use of the Enneagram is like, if you're what's the phrase, knowledge is power, that whole thing. It's really not it can be like, if that's what you want it to be, like knowing someone can grant you a power over them, but even power is a thing and that has to relation. Knowledge should lead to love. Like if you know your world better, that should mean you love your world better. So if you know yourself better, that should mean you love yourself deeper. If you know the world around you, know the people around you, you should love them better. And if I'm not coming to a place in my life where I like who I am more, I love who I am more, and I'm more capable of, like specifically, like you just said, I know how you're emotionally postured, and I can help you get better. If I'm not in a place where I'm loving my world better, then I'm completely missing this journey. And your relatively aggressive attack on the way the Enneagram has been used to honestly overcharacterize people, or overcaricaturize people, to minimize folks, so that we can actually entertain disdain more comically. That's the thing that the Enneagram has done, for like more so than I've seen it set people free. We've been able to entertain our disdain for one another and for ourselves more accurately, with greater comedy and with greater precision. I know how to minimize you better now. And so that's what I'm going to do. I know how to make fun of myself and shame myself for my weaknesses better now. And that's the place that right now, and maybe it's just a cultural moment, but it drives me up the damn wall. Like, that's not the job, guys. We're not trying to figure out ways to make this funnier that we're all so jacked. That's not the journey. The journey is love.
Yeah,
if we're not getting there, then we're doing it wrong.
It really is true. My kids they'll be around peers that talk about the Enneagram. They go, I can't even engage with it because it's abusive, or it's just kind of wrongheaded. And I'm in it for the long game. And I talked to a friend who said, this little craze of the Enneagram, it'll probably have a little blip, and then we'll move on to what's ever be on TikTok. I don't know what it is, but we'll move on to some new thing. And the Enneagram will still be this powerful tool. I'm just going to keep beating the drum about what the Enneagram is about. And I'm still confident that it's a tool that really does help you understand yourself in a deeper way, and gives you a lot more compassion for all those other types. And this world needs that right now.
That's good. Well, man, thanks a ton for your time. And thank you for joining me for this episode of the At Sea podcast. If you'd like to follow up with or dig deeper into Jim Gumb's work, you can go to storyenneagram.com. That's where he's selling his courses, and there's some free resource there, as well as kind of a deeper breakdown on what he thinks the Enneagram is and what it is not. It's just Story Enneagram, all one word. Enneagram has 2 N's in it at the beginning there. And if you'd like to be part of the team of folks who continue to make this podcast happen, we would love to have you on the team. You go to patreon.com/Justin McRoberts and join us. Until next time.